Hi, I'm Adrienne, and I found out I was erased from my father's will while sitting in the front pew at his funeral. No, not weeks before, not in some uncomfortable legal meeting. I found out at the funeral, surrounded by people who already knew and said nothing. They hugged me like family. They held my hand. They whispered, "He's in a better place." But none of them told me that while I was grieving my father, they had already buried my name too. The lawyer didn't even look me in the eye. He stood at the podium adjusting his tie like this was just another Wednesday. No tension, no tremble, like he wasn't about to drop a grenade in my lap. He cleared his throat, shuffled some papers, and said, "Per Mr. Carson's final wishes." That's when I felt it, the shift in the air, like the whole room knew something I didn't, like everyone had read the last page of the book except me. Envelopes were passed around, sealed, formal, almost sterile. Mine had my name printed on it, full name, middle included. It felt like a subpoena. I opened it with fingers that didn't feel like mine. And there it was. One sentence, bolded, final. To Adrienne Lynn Carson, the Hamilton pocket watch passed down from my father. That's it. No home, no equity. No mention of the 10 years I spent building his second company from scratch. Just a pocket watch that hadn't ticked in decades, and a silence that screamed louder than any betrayal ever could. I looked up expecting anyone to make eye contact. To offer a hint of confusion of solidarity of this must be a mistake. But all I saw were lowered eyes and lips pressed into tight practiced lines. That's when I realized I hadn't just been left out. I had been quietly, cleanly erased. Like a name wiped off glass with one smooth motion, no residue, no trace. And everyone here had watched it happen. Some had helped. I sat there frozen, clutching the envelope like it might suddenly morph into something else. Like if I held it tight enough, reality would rewrite itself. But it didn't. And the worst part, no one flinched. No gasps. No awkward shuffling. Just sips of water and folded programs and sympathetic glances so well rehearsed they could have been scripted. I was grieving my father, and yet the grief that settled deepest wasn't for the man we'd just buried. It was for the version of him I thought I knew. The man who used to say, "No one has your backbone, Adrienne." The man who called me his partner, not just his daughter. The man who once told a crowded boardroom, "I had the kind of grit you can't teach." Was it all a lie, or worse, had someone else rewritten the ending while I wasn't looking, because this didn't feel like a simple omission. It felt strategic, it felt orchestrated, and as I looked around the room at my stepmother's subtle smirk, at my half-brother's faux surprised brows, at the lawyer who avoided eye contact, like it burned a thought settled in. They knew. They all knew. Long before I opened that envelope, long before my name disappeared, I had been written out of the story, and none of them thought I'd have the audacity to write myself back in. But they forgot something. I wasn't the type to beg for a seat. I was the type to build the table. And this was not the end. It was the prologue. The truth is, I should have seen it coming. Not just that day, not just at the funeral, but years before in the sideways glances, the carefully edited family group texts the invitations that arrived late or not at all. In our family, silence didn't mean peace, it meant positioning, and I had slowly been moved out of frame without even realizing it. My father remarried when I was 12. Elena polished, soft-spoken, always smiling like she was posing for a holiday card. She never raised her voice. She didn't need to. Her power was quieter than that, the kind that didn't push you out of the room, just made it cold enough that you left on your own. By the time I was in college, I was already an afterthought. Family dinners turned into private brunches. Holiday plans were miscommunicated. I once found out about my stepsister's engagement via a post that said, "So honored to be surrounded by everyone I love most, everyone, but me." But I never said anything, because Dad still called. He still came to my gallery openings, even if he left early. He still said things like, I brag about you more than you know. So I let it go. Again and again. Even when they asked me to babysit during their anniversary trip, not invited, just useful. Even when they forgot to list me on the company's holiday press release, though I was the one who had written the copy for it. Even when they posted the family Christmas photo with me cropped out. Bad lighting, Elena had texted. Sure. But the worst of it was in the final year when Dad got sick. Stage 4. Fast-moving. And guess who moved in to care for him? Me. Not because I was asked, but because I couldn't imagine not being there. I cleaned feeding tubes. I read him the financial pages. I held his hand through morphine highs and confusion lows. Meanwhile, the rest of them, they came for 30-minute visits in coordinated clothes, taking pictures, and calling it quality time. And when I asked about the will, just once, Elena gave me that practice smile and said, "Don't worry about all that. Frank already handled everything." Now I knew what that meant. He handled everything, while I was handling him. I remember one night late around 2 a.m., Dad had just come out of a haze. His voice was raw, fragile, the kind that sounded like it might disappear mid-sentence. He looked at me and said, "You always show up, Adrienne, even when it costs you." I didn't know what he meant then. Now I do. Because while I was showing up, they were showing him what they wanted him to see. A version of me filtered through their lens, the black sheep, the emotional one, the daughter with boundary issues. And he was tired. He was sick. He didn't have the energy to challenge the narrative. Maybe he believed it a little. Maybe he just wanted peace and didn't realize he was buying it with the truth. Either way, it worked. By the time he passed, the family structure was already cemented, and I had been quietly positioned at the margins, not fully cut off, just carefully excluded, enough to make you question yourself, not enough to make a scene. They were good at that. No slammed doors, no yelling, just orchestrated omissions. Like the family group chat that somehow always glitched whenever I texted, or the family vacation that I only found out about through my cousin's Instagram stories. So lucky to be surrounded by the best people in the world, the caption read. I wasn't in the picture. I wasn't even in the country. But I was still Dad's daughter. Still the one who wiped his mouth when the meds made him throw up. Still the one who reminded him who he was when the memory loss crept in. And in the end, I thought that counted for something. Turns out it didn't. At least not in the version of the story they decided to print. I was present in the hardest parts, but absent from the final page. Now I understood. I was never part of the inner circle. I was the help with sentimental ties. And the will. The will was their final draft. A script that didn't include my name, but carefully preserved theirs. That watch they left me, the Hamilton, it had belonged to my grandfather, passed to my father on his wedding day. He used to keep it in a velvet box tucked away in his study. He once told me when I was 11 and curious, "This isn't for timekeeping, it's for remembering." So imagine the irony when I received it, not as a symbol of memory, but of erasure. The final breadcrumb tossed to someone they hoped would vanish quietly. I held that thing in my hand the night after the funeral, its casing dull with age, its hand stuck at 417. I don't even know if it ever worked. But in that moment, it told me everything I needed to know. Time ran out. Not just for Dad, but for the version of this family I'd kept protecting. I sat alone in my apartment, the envelope still on the table, wine untouched. Outside, the city moved on. Cars, laughter whined, brushing past like none of it had happened. Inside, I felt like a question mark. Unanswered, unwelcome, unwritten. And worst of all, I believed them. For a few hours that night, I believed I hadn't done enough. That maybe I wasn't who I thought I was. That maybe the person they made me out to be, the outsider, the overreactor, the not quite right daughter, was the truth. Because why else would I be left with nothing but a broken heirloom? But here's the thing about grief. It strips you raw. It peels away the lies you built to survive. And underneath all of it, I saw it clearly for the first time. This wasn't about worth. It was about control. And I had just been pushed 1 inch too far off the map. I wasn't lost. I was being deliberately miswritten, and that was about to change. The next morning, I walked into the memorial reception, feeling like an intruder in my own bloodline. The house was dressed in mourning white roses, crystal trays of hors d'oeuvres, soft piano music playing in the background, like grief could be choreographed. But underneath the polished surface, everything buzzed with calculation. It wasn't mourning, it was maneuvering. I watched as relatives circled in tight clusters, their voices hushed but animated. Eleanor floated from group to group like a queen, in exile eyes, glossy but alert. Every time someone offered her a condolence, she placed a delicate hand on their forearm and said, "Frank would have wanted peace." Peace. Funny how people only use that word when they've already won the war. I stood near the fireplace, gripping a glass of something expensive and untouched, feeling like I'd stepped into a play where everyone knew their lines except me. A cousin leaned in and whispered, "You holding up okay? You were always kind of sensitive with this stuff." Another, smiling too much, added, "I guess it makes sense. He probably thought you'd want to be left out of the mess." That word "left out" sank deep, like I had chosen this, like I had voted myself off the island. I heard my name in corners of the room I wasn't standing in, soft giggles behind half-covered mouths. One woman actually said, "Well, let's be honest, she's not exactly leadership material." That was my aunt, the one I used to draw pictures for every Christmas. The room wasn't full of mourners, it was full of strategists, and I wasn't a guest. I was a loose thread they were hoping would snip itself out. I moved through the crowd like a shadow no one wanted to acknowledge. Polite nods, brief eye contact. That's all anyone could spare me if they looked at all. At one point, I stood in the hallway and overheard my name again, this time from my stepmother. "She's been under a lot of stress," she said sweetly. And Frank, well, he didn't want her to feel burdened. Burdened. The word sat in my chest like wet cement. Was that what they told themselves, to make it easier, that I was too fragile to be trusted, too emotional to inherit, too complicated to deserve? Because I cleaned my father's wounds, because I changed his linens when no one else wanted to get that close, because I was there when he forgot his own name, and just whispered mine. I had been there through everything. And now I was the one being pitied, like a tragic footnote in someone else's victory speech. Even when my father was alive, there had always been levels, invisible hierarchies no one talked about but everyone knew. Elena and her children the center. I was orbiting, useful when needed, decorative when convenient, forgotten when I wasn't either. And now I wasn't just on the outside. I had been locked out, and the key wasn't lost. It had been melted. I wandered outside hoping for air. The backyard was lit with fairy lights and dotted with quiet conversations. I stood under an oak tree watching my half-brother laugh with two of Dad's old business partners. He threw his head back like he had won something. Maybe he had. Someone saw me standing alone and came over. A distant cousin. She offered a soft smile. "Maybe this is all for the best," she said gently. "You've always been more independent anyway." Independent. It was always the same coded language. What they meant was, "We've always expected less from you, so you should expect nothing from us." I nodded just to end the conversation. She walked off before the silence got too loud. And there I stood in the middle of my father's memorial, more alone than I had ever been. Not because he was gone, but because the people still here had already decided I didn't belong. Not in the family, not in the business, not even in the story. I wasn't just grieving a man. I was grieving the version of myself that believed I still had a place in his world. That night I couldn't sleep. The faces from the reception haunted me, not because they were cruel, but because they were so comfortable being complicit. I sat at my kitchen table, the will spread out in front of me, like a puzzle, with pieces that didn't fit. The more I stared at it, the more wrong it felt. Not just emotionally, legally. It was too neat, too perfectly timed, too convenient for everyone but me. Something buzzed inside me, a shift. Grief gave way to something sharper, not rage, not yet, but suspicion. I remembered a conversation 2 weeks before Dad died. We were sitting on the porch swing late at night. He was wrapped in a blanket, barely lucid, but still himself. "You'll be okay," he said. "I've made sure of that." At the time, I assumed he meant emotionally. Now, I realized he meant something more concrete. He meant protected, considered, included, and yet, I wasn't. So I opened my laptop and started digging. The first thing I searched for was the name of the law firm printed on the envelope. Same one Dad had used for years, but the partner who handled the estate, a different name than I remembered. A quick check on LinkedIn showed the old lawyer, Mr. Connors, had retired. 3 weeks before Dad's death. That was the first thread. The second came when I opened an old email from Dad, one I had nearly deleted. Subject: next week's agenda. Let's talk about the studio succession and your equity. Don't let me forget. It was dated 6 months before he passed. I searched through everything: texts, voicemails, photos, and slowly, a pattern began to form. There had been a change coming, and I was part of it. He'd mentioned updating the will. He'd asked for my business plan again. He'd even told me to meet with the accountant just in case something happened sooner than we think. This wasn't paranoia. This was proof. He hadn't intended to leave me out. Someone else made sure I was. I went looking for documents, anything he might have left behind. And then I remembered the sketchbook. Dad always kept one in his nightstand drawer. Not for drawing, he didn't have a creative bone in his body, but to jot things down. Ideas, thoughts, reminders to himself. It was messy, chaotic, full of half-finished notes and personal codes only he could decipher. After he passed, Eleanor told me she took care of the clutter. Now I knew exactly what that meant. Still, I had a copy. A few months before he got really sick, I'd borrowed it to scan a note he'd written me. I'd meant to return it the following week, but he ended up in the hospital and we both forgot. I pulled it out of my closet and opened it. Pages stuck together, ink smudged, smelled like dust and time. Then I saw it toward the back, scribbled in his all-caps handwriting: revisit the will. Move studio and equity under Adrienne's name. Elena will push back. Do it anyway. I stopped breathing. It was there. Black ink, sharp pressure on the page. As if he'd wanted to leave no room for doubt. I turned the page. A date, 2 weeks before he was put on hospice. I took a photo of the note, labeled it page 1, and dropped it into a new folder on my desktop titled, "They Think I Won't Fight." I was just getting started. Sabah. The next day, I requested a meeting with the law firm now handling the estate. They were hesitant, but I insisted. When I arrived, I brought everything. The email, the sketchbook scan, my business documents, screenshots of messages where Dad said, "When I'm gone, you take care of the studio." And most importantly, I asked one question: was there a previous version of the will? The junior partner looked uncomfortable. She left the room. 10 minutes later, she returned with a sealed folder. Inside was a will, dated 6 months earlier, and on the first page clear as daylight. To my daughter Adrienne, 50% equity in Carson Design Group, full ownership of the studio at 8th and Alder, and all related assets. It had his signature, notarized, stamped, but it had never been filed. I flipped through the rest, my hands shaking. His handwriting appeared again, notes in the margins, adjustments, even a line at the end. If Elena contests this, tell Adrienne I trust her to handle it. It wasn't just inclusion. It was intention. He had tried to protect me, and someone had buried that intention, like a body in the backyard. I left the law office, with that copy clutched like evidence from a crime scene, because that's what it felt like now. Not a misunderstanding, not a technical error, a theft, of my place, of my father's wishes, of the story we had written together. I sat in my car for nearly an hour, staring at the edges of the folder like it might burn through the seat. Then I opened my notes app and wrote one sentence. They didn't change his mind. They waited until he couldn't use it. Because the date on that signed, well, the one I held in my hands, was just 12 days before he entered full hospice care. And the final version that stripped me out entirely, that was signed a week later when he couldn't eat, barely spoke, and had no idea what day it was. I remembered how he'd drifted in and out during that time, sometimes mistaking me for my mum, sometimes calling me kiddo like nothing had changed, sometimes saying nothing at all. You don't make business decisions in that state. You don't rewrite your legacy. But someone had, someone did, and it didn't take a genius to figure out who. Elena had always been methodical. She never moved fast, just persistently. The soft voice, the folded hands, the way she always offered help without being asked, only to later claim it as obligation. I had seen it before when she gradually moved her son into Dad's company just to help with the books. 6 months later, he had an executive title and his own office. This was no different, only this time I had proof. And for the first time since the funeral, I felt something unfamiliar. Leverage, not just emotionally, legally, because Dad may have been too weak to stop it, but I wasn't, and if they thought I'd mourn quietly, they hadn't been paying attention all these years. I knew how to build. Now they were about to find out, I also knew how to reclaim. I didn't confront anyone right away. I didn't storm into the house screaming, didn't post a dramatic Facebook status, didn't show up at Eleanor's doorstep, waving the will in her face. No, that's what they expected. And I don't do predictable. I chose silence. But not the silence they were used to, the kind that says, I'm defeated or I've accepted this. Mine was the kind that says, I know what you did. And now I'm watching. I moved with purpose, not panic. First I made copies of everything, the signed draft, the hospice records, the scanned sketchbook page, emails, voicemails, meeting notes, legal precedents, case law. I organized it all into a folder titled, In Case I Disappear. Then I reached out to 2 people quietly, Dad's former business partner and the estate's financial auditor. I didn't accuse anyone. I asked questions. Do you remember Frank mentioning any updates to his estate plan before hospice? Were there any meetings you weren't included in, but Eleanor was? Has the firm received any unusually timed authorizations or withdrawals? Their answers weren't confirmations, but their hesitations were. Meanwhile, I returned to my life, at least on the surface. Back to my studio, back to my canvas. I painted during the day and built a legal case at night, and the whole time they said nothing. No calls, no follow-ups, no acknowledgement that I'd been at the memorial or asked to see the will, or walked out early with my jaw clenched and my hands shaking. Because they assumed silence meant surrender. It didn't. It meant preparation. I stayed quiet, but I was never still. While they toasted to their new chapter behind closed doors, I was redrawing the map, while Eleanor posted a photo captioned, Peace Finally. I was cross-referencing signature timestamps with Dad's medication logs, and every time doubt crept in, every time I wondered if I was chasing ghosts, I'd replay his voice in my head. You've always had the guts. Just don't let them shrink you. So I didn't. I started working with a probate attorney discreetly. Her name was Maya. Sharp eyes, steel voice, the kind of woman who could turn a courtroom into a confessional with 2 sentences. I handed her the folder and said, I don't want revenge. I want the record corrected. She looked through it page by page, then leaned back and said, This isn't just sloppy. This is manipulation. And depending how far it goes, it could be criminal. She explained how wills work, how final is never really final if coercion or incapacity is involved, how signatures mean nothing if signed under sedation, how families don't break apart over money, they break apart over the belief that someone's voice didn't matter. That last part stuck with me, because this wasn't just about assets. It was about dignity. It was about not letting them walk away with the narrative, and I knew exactly when to make my move. They were hosting a dinner, a celebration of legacy as the invite said, at the lake house, the same one I helped renovate, the same one I wasn't mentioned in. Everyone would be there. The smiling liars, the silent witnesses, the ones who benefited from keeping their heads down. And so would I. Not as the forgotten daughter, not as the grieving outsider, but as the woman who came back to reclaim what was hers without asking. They didn't invite me, of course, not directly, but the family has a way of leaking things just enough to stay in control. A forwarded email, a tag in a group photo captioned, "Grateful to be surrounded by legacy." A vague message from a cousin, "Hope you're doing okay. It'd be nice to see you at the lake this weekend." That was enough. I knew exactly where I needed to be. The lake house looked just as I remembered it. Wide windows, dock lined with string lights, wine glasses clinking on the patio before sunset. It had always been a place dressed in warmth and built on cold foundations. As I pulled up, a valet appeared before I even turned off the engine. Polite smile, raised brow. He didn't recognize me. Perfect. I stepped out wearing black, not because I was in mourning, but because I came to bury the lie. Inside the house hummed with laughter and the low roar of storytelling. Aunt Carol was retelling some memory for the 5th time. My half-brother was pouring drinks like he owned the walls. And Elena. She was standing at the head of the long dinner table, raised glass in hand, voice delicate but commanding. Frank loved this home. He built it for family, for unity, for a legacy that lasts. And I know he'd be smiling down proud of everything we've done together to honor that. The room nodded, applauded, clinked glasses. That's when I stepped forward. No announcement, no shout, just the sound of my heels against marble, steady and sharp. Heads turned slowly, some confused, some startled, and a few not surprised at all. Elena froze mid-sip. Her smile didn't drop, but it stopped being real. She didn't move, just stared like she'd seen a ghost that had the nerve to walk back in the door. I walked to the center of the room, took a deep breath, and placed a black leather folder on the table. No dramatics, no shaking voice, just clarity. Since we're celebrating legacies tonight, I said, my tone calm, controlled, and louder than I'd spoken in months. I thought I'd bring the part of Dad's legacy no one here mentioned. A beat of silence. Someone laughed awkwardly. My half-brother shifted in his chair. I opened the folder, pulled out one sheet, slid it across the table. This is a signed will dated 6 months before the version read at the funeral. In it, my father names me as a 50% beneficiary of Carson Design Group and sole owner of the Alder Street studio. I watched as eyes scanned the paper. No one spoke, so I continued. He was of sound mind when he signed this. It was notarized, valid, but it was never filed. I pulled out the second sheet. This one, filed a week later, was signed while he was under hospice sedation. Unresponsive, according to 3 different nursing records. Including this one, I tapped the highlighted hospice note. Patient nonverbal, semi-conscious, not oriented to time or location. I looked around. So I guess my question is, who exactly helped him sign a legal document that week? Eleanor stepped forward. Adrienne, this isn't the time. No, I cut in. You made that decision for me when you submitted a forged revision of his final wishes. Gasps this time. Small, sharp, honest ones. People were no longer sipping wine. They were holding their breath. I reached into the folder once more. Pulled out the letter. His letter. The one written in shaky handwriting across yellow legal paper, tucked in his sketchbook, signed with love. If something happens before I finish this process, Adrienne is to inherit the studio. She built it with me. Elena will fight it. Let her. I trust Adrienne to finish what we started. My voice didn't shake. But Elena's did. That letter was never... It was never meant for you, I said. She opened her mouth again, probably to spin it to say I was confused, emotional, clinging to scraps. But I didn't give her the room. You always knew how to make things look clean, Elena. That's your talent. But this time, you went too far. You didn't just try to control the narrative, you tried to delete the truth. I looked around the room, eyes locking with people who had once pretended not to see me. The ones who smiled while stepping over me. The ones who shrugged when I disappeared from photos and family emails and holidays. Let me be clear. This isn't a plea. I'm not here to ask for anything, not to share, not a title, not even an apology. I'm here to correct the record. I slowly closed the folder. I've already submitted the documents to my attorney. A formal legal challenge has been filed with probate court. All communications have been preserved. Every omission, every signature, every whisper of manipulation is now evidence. Someone stood from the table, my father's former business partner. He looked visibly shaken. Is this true? He asked no one in particular. No one answered. I didn't need them to. I turned back to Eleanor. You didn't erase me. You just underestimated me. Again. She tried to smile, but it flickered and died. I picked up the folder, tucked it under my arm, and looked one last time at the room. Tell whatever version of this story you want, but know this, I've already written mine, and this time it's going to be the one that lasts. And with that, I walked out. No raised voice, no slammed door, just the click of my heels echoing off marble and gilt. The air outside felt different, crisper, sharper, like the moment just after a thunderstorm when the world hasn't quite dried, but everything smells like relief. I didn't look back. Not once. I didn't need to see their faces. I'd seen enough over the years at that dinner table in their side glances and stilted small talk. I wasn't walking away from them. I was walking back toward myself. For the first time in years, my steps didn't hesitate. Connoisseur. That night I went home and turned off my phone. No doom scrolling, no text replies, no spinning the moment in my head like a broken record. I sat down at my studio, and opened a fresh canvas. I didn't know what I was going to paint. But for the first time since the funeral, my hands didn't feel heavy. I didn't need their inheritance, because what they didn't understand was that I had already inherited everything that mattered. My father's vision, his drive, his flaws, and yes, his belief in me no matter how much they tried to scrub it out of the paperwork. They could keep the lake house, the cars, the hollow rituals. What I wanted could never be passed down in a will, because it had been passed to me long before he died. And now I wasn't asking for space. I was claiming it. I didn't have to prove my worth. I just had to stop letting them define it. A week later, the court acknowledged the challenge. The will was under review. The hospice records were submitted. The letter from my father officially entered into evidence. But I didn't show up to every legal meeting. I let the facts speak louder than I ever could. Let them sort through the paper trail, the one I built quietly, piece by piece, while they celebrated too early. Meanwhile, I kept painting. Not for galleries, not for praise, for peace. People started noticing not the court case, but the shift. An art magazine ran a feature on the new direction of my work. An old client reappeared, offering to commission something large, whatever's been sitting in your soul. And one morning, I got a message from someone I hadn't heard from in years. My cousin, the only one who used to ask how I was really doing. I saw what you did. I wish I had spoken up earlier. You weren't wrong. I didn't respond. Didn't need to. Because sometimes validation doesn't come from others, it comes from finally seeing yourself clearly. I didn't want revenge. I wanted something harder to earn and harder to fake my own narrative. I wasn't waiting for the court to decide who I was to my father. He already told me in his words, in his actions, in the parts of his life no one else had access to. And now I stood in that space fully without apology. 1 year later, I stood on the porch of a small cottage by the lake. Not the big one. Not the one with the marble countertops and imported fixtures. This one was mine. All mine. A little weather-worn, a bit uneven, but chosen. No one handed it to me. No one signed it over. I built it, saved for it, found it on my own. There's something powerful about stepping into a space that doesn't come with expectations or ghosts. Just air, and light, and peace you don't have to perform for. Inside the shelves were full of canvases, unframed, raw, honest. On one wall hung a photo of my father, not the framed corporate portrait they used at the funeral, a candid one. He's laughing, wind in his hair, coffee in hand. It was taken at the studio, the real one, not the showroom they turned it into, back when it was just him, me, and sawdust on the floor. Below it sat a plaque, small, simple. Legacy, not what you're given, but what you refuse to abandon. That same day, I launched the first scholarship in his name, for young artists who never got invited to the table so they could build their own. I received dozens of submissions. One stood out, a girl named M, 17, fierce, honest. In her application, she wrote, "I'm applying because I'm tired of asking for permission to exist." And in that moment I saw myself, not the erased version, the full one, the writer of her own ending. Some days I still hear echoes of the house, the silence, the things they didn't say, but they don't shake me anymore. Because I don't live in that story now. I live in this one where I am no longer waiting to be named in someone else's will. I am the will, the choice, the continuation. Sometimes the most powerful inheritance isn't what you're given, it's what you finally stop chasing. Because once you stop begging for a seat at their table, you remember you've been building your own all along.